What? Now it's going. Good Yom Tov, everybody. Today is Yotes Kislev, it's the Rosh Hashanah of Chassidus, so it's a perfect day for us to resume our class. And we're in the middle of the Maimer Mitzvas Ner Chanukah, Rabanan Ner Chanukah, and we're holding chapter 5. So let's just review what we learned in chapter 4, and then we'll move on to chapter 5. Chapter 4, we're talking about mitzvahs and the different motivations for fulfilling a mitzvah. So generally, a person would say, and there's room to suggest this even in Torah, even within from the Medrash, the idea that mitzvahs are moral obligations that perfect us, that advance society and civilization. Moral, well, they're legal, obviously legally binding, but they also are morally compelling, or shape us and fashion our morals. And that's true really of all mitzvahs, even the irrational, the super rational mitzvahs we don't understand, but still there's a benefit to man in terms of our development and our morality to do things that don't even where the reason is not so readily apparent. There could be advantages to that as well. We give examples from different mitzvahs where that's the case. In fact, the commentaries and the thinkers throughout Jewish history have offered many different reasons for mitzvahs, even the mitzvahs that where there are no reasons given for the mitzvah, and the different tangible benefits that they afford man. But here in the Maimer, the Rebbe says that that's not what motivates a Jew to fulfill a mitzvah. Why does a Jew fulfill a mitzvah? So we said two things. The Rebbe spoke on two levels. First, he gives a higher level, then goes down to the lower level, then he turns it around and goes the other way. So let's start with the lower level of mitzvahs. And that is that when God gives us a commandment, He has His reasons for the commandments. And the reasons for the commandments are in God's wisdom. Let's start it again from the other side. Let's do it the way the Rebbe does in the Maimer. We'll work our way down this way. Mitzvahs originate where? In God's will. What is a mitzvah? A mitzvah is something that God desires. And we've talked about this many times. We talked about it also, I think, in last class a little bit. We touched on this idea that will is a higher function of the soul than intellect. Intellect is we're intelligent. That's sort of the highest part of us. But that's an internal quality, an internal faculty. Meaning it's specific, it's in the mind, but will is a transcendent quality, and that's something that's really all over the person, and that is higher than intellect. In Kabbalistic terms, you have chachma and you have keser. So chachma is in the mind, the head. You have chabad that's in the mind, and then keser is the crown that sits above the head. Keser in Chassidus is ratzon, will. Will is like the crown, it sits above that, meaning it's higher than intellect. So where with us, most of our desires, most of our will starts from something else. It starts from something that we see or we are made aware of, and then we have a desire for it in whatever way. It appeals to us in different ways, and then based on that, based on the appeal to us, the argument it's making for us to desire it, that's how we desire it. The thing is, that's not real will. Also, that's a limited will, because like it says in Pirkei Avos, that any ava that's tluya b'davar is batla davar v'teila ava. That any love that's predicated on a reason. So once the reason is no longer there, then there's no longer any love. It's the same idea as with will. If you have a reason to want something, so your will is limited by the reason. But true will doesn't originate from something else. It originates within the person. Will is a expression of the soul. And so it's not dependent on any reason. So real will is something that originates beyond reason. And then, generally, since we're rational human beings, and will is a transcendent quality of ours, but we live in the present, hopefully. So we need to then, part of that process is to start rationalizing, understanding why it is we want it. But when it originates in our will, somebody can make an argument to convince you why you shouldn't desire it, it's not going to affect your desire, because the desire is higher than will. So when we say that God desires the mitzvahs, God wants us to do a mitzvah, that's will. With God, nothing exists outside of God. It originates within God. So it's not that there's a mitzvah that God found desirable, and therefore He says, "Oh, I want that. Therefore, I want tefillin because they're a wonderful thing." No, all mitzvahs, even the rational ones, even the mitzvahs that we fully can understand and appreciate, but they originate in God's will. So they're beyond reason. So mitzvahs, essentially, on their highest level, are things that have no reason, or are beyond. Put it that way, that are beyond reason. But just like within man, we have things that we desire, and then we start rationalizing it. It's the same is true with God, that after there's His will, He then, the will then goes into divine wisdom, into divine chachma. And we'll talk a little bit more about chachma here as well. We'll get into chachma. But the point is that it goes into God's wisdom, as it were. And in God's wisdom, that's all mitzvahs, even we talked about in the last mimer, we touched on this, one of the footnotes, that even para aduma, which is the prototypical mitzvah that has no reason, right? Even that mitzvah, there's also a reason for that will, which is beyond reason. Then it goes into God's reason. God has a rationale, a reason for the mitzvahs. And then from there, those mitzvahs come down into our reality, some of which we can understand. God gives us the opportunity, the ability to be able to understand a little bit of it, and some remain as they were in God's wisdom, totally beyond our understanding. So for a person, this idea shifts our perspective. And it shifts our perspective not just with regard to mitzvahs, but in general, in life. All the great theological questions that people ask, because theology is all about trying to understand God, trying to know God. And we start, since we're intelligent beings and we understand a lot, so we start with the premise that we can understand anything and everything. And then when there's something we don't understand, so that's a problem. And then we have to readjust the thing, or we have to readjust how we feel about the thing. But the truth is that that's backwards. Man has no business understanding anything about God, not even God's wisdom, because God's wisdom is infinite, our wisdom is finite. The finite can't comprehend the infinite. So, as things are in God's wisdom, that already is totally beyond our capacity to be able to understand. So it's not surprising when a person doesn't understand God's will and God's plan. What's surprising is that we can that the reason for it is completely beyond the human experience, and furthermore that it's beyond reason altogether, that we fulfill it because it's God's will. This devotion to God that's expressed in a mitzvah, when a Jew fulfills a mitzvah, that's what they objected to. And so we conclude chapter 4 by explaining this is the meaning of the words, and we say, V'alanissim lahavira mechukei ritzeinecha, that the Greeks sought to divert us from fulfilling the statutes of your will. What is the chukei ritzeinecha? We said it seems a bit redundant. So the point is like this. Chukim, statutes, means mitzvahs that are beyond our understanding. They have reason, but they're beyond our reason. Ritzeinecha, that's your will, meaning that the mitzvahs also are on a level that are beyond any reason, even beyond divine reason. They originate in the divine will. And this is something that a Jew feels or experiences or should experience in every mitzvah he fulfills. So we said that it's not just that they sought to do away with the irrational commandments where you see that you're doing it only because God said so. So you don't wear shatnez because God said so. There's no other reason to do it. They didn't just object to these kinds of mitzvahs, they objected even to the rational mitzvahs, because a Jew brings this experience even into the rational mitzvahs. That when he fulfills it, it's not because his mind is telling him there's a compelling reason to do it, he's doing it because because it's God's will.
So the three things that they were most concerned with were Bris Milah and
Shabbos.
And what was the third one?
We had it in one of the footnotes here. We addressed it.
I'm sorry, I make you go back.
Where is it? We had it in a footnote. No, the point is we addressed this idea of how what it is that they were banning. Milah Chodesh, Rosh Chodesh, the idea of Rosh Chodesh. That's what it is. We addressed that it's not a contradiction. We discussed the different ways of answering that question. The point is that eventually they got to banning all of Judaism, because the point was the godliness within it. And therefore, even the mitzvahs that are rational, they objected to it. Not that they objected to not murdering, they objected to the fact that a Jew doesn't murder because God said so. Because that's what God wants. Now, obviously, you should also not murder because it should also appeal to your sensibilities. Obviously, it should be the only.
Say that even lashon hara is like murder.
Right, right. Well, but the point is that was what they objected to. The fact that the Jew does it because that's what God wants. Okay, chapter 5. So the Greeks, they were objecting to this, and now now we can understand the kind of the strange terminology in the Gemara, which we had quoted at the beginning before we started the Maimer. This is a direct quote. This is a quote. The Gemara says, when the Greeks entered the sanctuary in the temple, Timu kol hashmanim shebehechol. They defiled all of the oil that was in the heichel, in the sanctuary. So, I mean, it seems... we already said, it's like, it keeps mentioning heichel. But besides for just mentioning heichel, which is a little puzzling, but there's another point. And we discussed this earlier as well. The idea that if you're going in to defile the temple, you want to ransack the place. So if the point is to prevent the Jews from fulfilling their service in the temple, so what do? You don't want them to light a menorah. What do? What's the most effective way to get them to not light the menorah? Smash all their oil reserve. The lishkas beis shmanya, right? The oiling, there's a room, there's a closet where all the oil was. Which, by the way, I think also that it doesn't say it here, but I'm thinking that it says that when they defiled the oil in the heichel, the oil really wasn't housed. It wasn't kept in the heichel. It wasn't kept in the sanctuary. It was, the heichel usually referred to as the room where the menorah was, and the incense altar and the table. Those are in the heichel. They were out in the Ezras Nashim in one of the chambers there. That's where it was kept. So it doesn't discuss that here clearly, but I think it might be a point. It's also an emphasis, meaning because as we're going to say soon in a moment, what the significance of heichel is. But the point is that if you want to prevent them from lighting the menorah, so just destroy all the jars of oil, let it all spill out, and now they can't light a menorah. They didn't do that. They went through the trouble, and that's also easier. You take a sledgehammer to the place. That's a lot easier than going and breaking the seal. They left all the jugs intact. They just broke all the seals. They contaminated the oil. Timu kol hashmanim.
Also, we said they technically could have lit it because everyone was tummy. If everything was tummy, technically could light it with tumah.
Right. So they So they mamish weren't interrupting the service. So what was the point? Like you're saying, so there was really no point in them doing this. So what was that they did this? And while they're going through the temple, doing everything, they're just contaminating the oil. What's the significance? The implication here of the Gemara is what were they trying? They exerted effort in trying to specifically contaminate the oil, and that was how they thought they were going to defeat the Jewish people. Why? What's the significance? Ki heichal hu bina. Heichal, sanctuary. Heichal is bina, represents the level of bina. V'shemen hu chachma shalamayla mahaseichel de bina. And oil is chachma. Kenal sev beis shemen hu b'chinas kodesh, as we explained in chapter 2 about oil, which is higher than the intellect of bina. What does this mean? So we know chachma and bina are the first two intellectual faculties. Chachma is sort of the idea. It's not really even the kernel of an idea. It's really more of a curiosity for an idea. The chachma's kayachma means that it's really a curiosity. So it's not even. So it's discussed. It's like that's like the flash, the lightning bolt, the seed of an idea. And so chachma is abstract and it's not defined. What happens after you have a moment of creativity where now there's a new idea? Now it has to come into bina, the next step in the intellectual process, which is to start dissecting it, to take it apart, to analyze it, and to develop it. You have to develop the idea. So heichal, the sanctuary, that is bina because it's a room with dimensions and borders. So that's why bina is heichal. So bina is heichal. The sanctuary, that's the level of bina, of understanding. And then you have shemen, the oil, is chachma. Why is the shemen chachma? Why is shemen chachma? We talked about in chapter 2, the idea that shemen is kodesh, it's holy, and it's aloof, it's removed from everything else. So the oil, just like the chachma, that's beyond comprehension. So shemen is chachma. So therefore the Greeks came and defiled all the oil that was in the sanctuary of bina. Why? In order to, God forbid, achieve their goal, their plan. Their goal was to cause the Jews to forget the godliness in Torah and the godliness in the commandments. What they desired was that the Jew should learn Torah and fulfill mitzvahs because of intellect, because of the rationale. There should be a rational approach to study and to observance, not the godliness. So, I'm sorry. So therefore, they wanted the chachma, the shemen, the oil that was in the heichal, the shemen in the heichal. Both intellect, that level of chachma that's beyond understanding, beyond comprehension. That's what they wanted to contaminate, and they actually did contaminate it. They did contaminate. So in other words,
how does it correlate shemen with chachma and bina with heichal?
So we just explained. Bina is developed, and therefore bina is heichal, like a developed building or structure.
Right.
Shemen is oil. That represents essence, right? It represents kodesh, something separate, something aloof, something that's not mixed in. So chachma is that same idea. The chachma is an aloofness. Chachma is a curiosity that resides beyond comprehension, beyond that fully developed understanding. So they were successful. They contaminated the chachma. They were able to reach chachma, that level of chachma that's within the bina, the shemen in the heichal. Chachma and bina, those two levels of chachma and bina, they were able to affect. They contaminated it, and that's so they did. Timu kol hashmanim shebeheichal. So what does this mean? And then we're going to get to before we get to chapter 6. So what we said till now, when we were just now reviewing from chapter 4, ultimately, even this idea of fulfilling mitzvahs because it's God's will beyond reason. Right, so there's both that it's in God's reason, which is beyond our reason, and then it's God's will that's beyond reason altogether, and that's why a Jew fulfills a mitzvah. So when we fulfill a mitzvah, we recognize the godliness in it. But even so, and the Greeks objected to this idea. They rejected the godliness that was present in our service of God, in our Judaism. They rejected the godliness. But even so, when a Jew fulfills Torah and mitzvahs, even recognizing that it's God's will, beyond reason, still, there's a rational approach to that. As we discussed in the past, you can make an argument to say, that even though you're a rational person, so everything you do is rational, but you don't understand everything you do, or you don't understand the reason, or even the full reason to all the things that you do. You recognize sometimes somebody tells you, somebody that's smarter than you, with more experience and more knowledge and more insight will tell you to do something, and you'll rely on their wisdom, you'll rely on their intelligence to do what they tell you to do. That's rationally acceptable. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing irrational about that. It's not reckless or irresponsible. Somebody that you trust, that's smarter than you, and tells you to do something, even if you don't understand it, doing it, even though you don't understand it, it's still a rational thing to do. It's an intelligent thing to do. So even when we come to God, we can come to God rationally. And we could serve God forget about our reason. We're doing it because this is what God wants. But even that is something it's a process that we work our way through to come to serve God. Why should I serve God? Because He said so. Okay. And because God said so, and I believe in God, and God's very important to me, and so therefore I do that. There, it's possible, in that sort of process that a person goes through, there it's possible for the Greeks to defile that oil, to contaminate that oil. And that's what happened. Because ultimately, when we talk about our intellect, our reasoning is ultimately limited. We're limited, and so therefore any process that we go through is a limited process. If it's a limited process, means that there's a place that it can reach, and then it stops. And so at that level, the Greeks were able to challenge the Jewish people. So how do you defeat them? If they can contaminate even the shemen, even that chachma, the wisdom, the chachma that's within our serving Hashem, so how do you combat that? So that's chapter 6. So in order to win this war, so it's not enough to serve God rationally. And also, it's not enough to serve God beyond reason, but in a way that's tied to reason, which is which is a service of God that stems from the level of chaya of the soul, which is the makif hakarev. Let's finish this sentence and then we'll come back to this. Since the Greeks defiled all the oil in the sanctuary, hainu gama and yadim kedusha shalamayla mitamedas Because the Greeks defiled all the oil in the temple, and oil, shemen, which is chachma, that's higher than reason. So we're already talking about a level of transcendence to an extent, and they were able to contaminate even there. So what does this mean? So let's take it one step at a time. So we just said before, my little introduction to chapter 6 here, that there's serving God based on reason. There's a rational reason to serve God. So that would be, in what we said when we discussed earlier, that would be, God has His reasons. God's reasons are more important, or they're much big. God's reasons are infinite. I can't ever hope to understand God's reasons, but God has His reasons. So as an intelligent person, I serve God because of His reason. So that's avodah al pi tam v'das. That's rational. Then you have recognizing that even God has His reasons for all of it. But really, the mitzvahs are God's will that are beyond reason. So I serve God irrespective of what the reason is. Whether He has a reason or not is irrelevant. I do it because He wants. So that's already not a reasonable avodah, because there's no reason. Reason is irrelevant to me at that stage. It's God's will. That's what matters. But even though that's beyond reason, beyond rationale, it's not a rational service, but still it's related to rationale. I've made a decision. I recognize that we can understand the concept that will is higher than reason, than intellect. So even though we're already now in a domain that's beyond intellect, but we got there intellectually. Right? We took it step by step, and rationally we got to that point. So even though it's already higher than reason, but it's still connected to reason. So when we serve God because of reason, so we've talked about this topic a lot in the different Mamarim we learned, that there's the koiches pnimim and there's koiches makifim. And in the last Mamarim we talked also about the 5 levels of the soul. So you have 3 levels that are internal, nefesh, ruach, neshama. Those are internal. Those are the parts of the soul that are invested within the body. So those are the finite sort of an internal functions of the soul. And then you have chai and yichida, the 2 transcendent levels of the soul that don't enter the body. They remain up in heaven. They don't enter the body. They're part of the same, your soul, but they remain beyond. These 2 levels of Chai Yechida are transcendent. So and we discussed that why you have 2 levels of if it's transcendent, because there are 2 types of transcendence. There's a close transcendence and a distant transcendence. And the analogy we gave is of clothing and of a house, right? So you have mazon, levush, bayis. Mazon is food, levush is clothing, and bayis is a house. Mazon, food, that's internal. You eat, you ingest it, and it becomes part of you. The food that you eat becomes part of you, and you are what you eat, right? So that's something that's internalized. That represents the internal functions of the soul. That represents those levels of nefesh, ruach, and neshama. That represents the internal faculties of the soul that are internalized. Then you have chai and yechida, which are levush and bayis. Levush, garments don't enter the person. You don't eat your clothing. You wear clothing, so they're around you. Clothing come from a higher source. That's why they come from a level of transcendence. Their source, the source of clothing in heaven, because everything in the physical world has a source in the spiritual realms, is from a level of makif, a transcendent level. And therefore, it transcends, it surrounds us. But your clothing are fit. They're fit to your size. They're tailored to fit you, your body type, your style, right? Your era that you live in. So your clothing are tailored to the person. So while they're transcendent, they're still connected to the person. There's still a strong connection. Then there's a house. A house surrounds a person from beyond. You don't fit. A house is not tailored to fit. A house surrounds the person, surrounds anybody who's in a house. They're in the house equally. Nobody's more in the house or less in the house. Nobody fits better in the house than anybody else. The house represents a distant level, makif harachik.
There's still the malabayas.
Yeah, true. There's obviously still the fact that it's transcendent of something else. But still, we're going to contrast the close transcendence and the far. That's where we have to make that. That's where we're making that distinction. Because you're right. And ultimately, we do get to that point where something that's even makif is still always a connection. Fine, and it's your essence of your soul, the chaya, or the yechida. Which is the distant transcendence, is still the yechida of your soul. It's your yechida. Okay, so the point is like this: that you have you have the service of God that's rational and the service of God that's beyond rationale. And everything we talked about till now is one or the other. It's either a rational service of God, rational meaning not that I serve Him because I understand. I serve because it's in Chachma Shalom Ayla, that God has His reasons that are infinite that I can't hope to understand, and I serve Him for that reason. That's a rational approach to serving Hashem. And then you have the beyond rationale, which is that it's the rationale, the reason behind it is irrelevant. It's God's will, and therefore I serve Him. But we get to that through Tam V'das, through reason. The problem is that the Greeks were able to defile even that higher level, the level that's beyond reason. So how do you defeat such an enemy that's managed to contaminate and to pervert even that higher level, that level of transcendence? So the how do you win the war? How do you defeat such an enemy? It's through self-sacrifice. Mesiris Nefesh, self-sacrifice, is the standing strong in the face of all challenges and obstacles, which is a teikef atzmi shalamayla masechel gami. That's an inherent strength that is beyond any type of rationale and reason. So again, we've talked about the idea of higher than Tam V'das. We spoke about the Makif HaKarev. We spoke about serving God because of Ratzon. But even though that's beyond reason, it's still connected to reason. I can rationally make the argument for why I should submit to God's will that's higher than reason. But to withstand any of the external pressures with Mesiris Nefesh, that's beyond any reason. There's no argument that's made for this. For example, self-sacrifice, that is, when a person gives his life to sanctify the name of heaven. What does it mean when we say self-sacrifice? What does it mean, Mesiris Nefesh? So, and again, this is also something that we've been talking about. Thank God we've already got a long history of learning here, so we covered a lot of these topics. So we discussed this idea of Mesiris Nefesh. What's Mesiris Nefesh mean? So the way Chassidus explains Mesiris Nefesh is, Alter Rebbe explains in Tanya, there's no thought process involved. It's not a decision that's made, a conscious decision, I'm going to have something. No, you could have such a thing. You could decide to have Mesiris Nefesh. But Mesiris Nefesh, the way it's talked about in Chassidus, is there's no process. It's impossible for you to disconnect from God. You could call it an instinct, but instinct is in a sense lower. But you could kind of call that. It's a sort of you could say it's instinctive, in that you don't go. It's not a process that you go through. Meaning, what does it mean that a person has self-sacrifice? We talked about this in the past. If somebody comes and says that they want, God forbid, they come to a Jew and say, "We want you to worship idols." So what's the big deal? The worship is something going on inside. But if somebody says, if you don't bow to the idol, he's going to kill him. How do they know that in that moment you've renounced God and now you're worshiping idols? You've suddenly embraced the idolatry. It's only an external act. It's only on the outside. He doesn't know what's going on in your heart. There's no way for him to know what's going on inside. So you pay lip service, you do what you need to do, and you move on. And yet, throughout history, there have been Jews that have been incapable of doing that. And not just big rabbis that had their reputations on the line that were going to cause, problems in their communities if they went through it and got back home, lose their jobs. Talking about people that had nothing on the line, people that weren't observant, that didn't necessarily, if you asked them the day before, if they believed in God, they'd give you a very long, complicated answer. Maybe they don't even, not so much, what is God, But at that moment of truth, they were incapable of doing even an act that's a hollow external act. Why? Because even on the surface, they weren't able to disconnect. There's no rationale for that. You can make an argument for why a person should go along, go through the motions and do what they would, right? Or you can make a decision and say, that there's a reason why. But throughout history, Jews have been incapable of choosing. So Mesiris Nefesh is not a choice that a person makes. Mesiris Nefesh is an expression of the inherent strength that the soul has, its connection with Hashem, that when it feels that it's being violated, it can't choose anything. So Mesiris Nefesh isn't a choice; it's the absence of a choice. That's how Chassidus explains Mesiris Nefesh. So that's what we're saying here. Mesiris Nefesh is not a decision to do something beyond rationale. That even though maybe I should go through with this, I'll have self-sacrifice. I'm going to live for a cause that might lead to some kind of harm. It's beyond that. There is no choice that's being made. So it's beyond any rationale. That's Mesiris Nefesh. How, where does that come from? It comes mitzad haiskashus. That's manashama b'chinas yichida. The inyan haiskashus atzmis u'shiyef sheklali is b'ifnach chazashom. It comes from the level of yichida, from the essence of the soul that always is always one with God, and that part of the soul, the essence of the soul, the level of yichida meaning oneness, that's one with God, that can't be separated. So it can't have any other. It can't have it any other way. Since Yechida this level of Yechida has no opposition. How are we doing at that? We have no opposition to this level of Yechida, to the level of oneness. The Gemara says, in it's an interesting Gemara, that somebody hears a voice that calls out and says, I want you to give my wife a divorce. So the Gemara asks, how do you know? So do you listen? You're not listening. The Gemara asks, how do you know that it was this husband that said it? Maybe it was a demon. Maybe it was the voice of a demon that said it. You heard it coming from a pit somewhere. Maybe it was a demon. So the Gemara says, because it doesn't have. If you'll know, because demons don't have shadows. They do have a shadow. Demons do have a shadow, but they don't have a shadow of a shadow. The shadow has no shadow. Babua de babua. Less luhum. So in Chassidus it discusses this idea that demons, meaning which represent the level of unholiness, of evil, of klipa. So it's created a mirror image of holiness. So everything you find in holiness, zel umazel salikim, you find it also in unholiness, with the exception of the essence. So there's even a shadow. So there's the thing itself. Right, there's let's say the body of the demon that would correlate, that corresponds to the body, let's say, of man. Then there's the shadow. The shadow is already not it. The shadow is already transcendent. That's a makif level. But holiness has a shadow of a shadow, meaning two levels of makif. There's makif hakariv, makif harachik. There's chaya and there's yichida. Whereas unholiness doesn't have that evil doesn't have klipa doesn't have that higher level. Doesn't have yichida. Yichida has no opposition. There's no counterpart to Yechida, to the level of Yechida. And therefore, when you access the level of Yechida, you can defeat the Klippa, you can defeat the unholiness. So here, we're talking this, we'll wrap it up here in a second. I don't know if we'll get to finish, I was hoping to finish this chapter, we'll finish it already on Monday. But, so this idea of Yechida is how we defeat the Greeks. So the Greeks that represent unholiness represent the challenge to godliness. They can even contaminate the shemen shebehechel. They can even contaminate the oil, meaning a level of transcendence. But which level? Only the makif hakariv, the one that's the level of super rational service of God that starts off rational, that's through a rational process, the one that's related to tam v'das, to reason. The higher level, which is a level that is what prompts a Jew to Mesiras Nefesh, that level there's no opposition to, which is why, as we're going to finish in the Maimer, we see ultimately they find the level of the oil that's sealed with the seal of the high priest. Why did they find a jug of oil that had the seal of the high priest? Because the seal of the high priest, that represents the essence of the soul. And the essence of the soul is something they can't reach, they can't contaminate. So the other oil they were able to reach. The essence of the soul, the higher level, the essence of the soul, Yechida, that they weren't able to reach, and that's expressed in the level of the Pach Echad Shel Shemen. So to relate it to Yutas Kislev, we're talking, today's Yutas Kislev, Rosh Hashanah Chassidus. I just finished the story, the Alter Rebbe, when he was interrogated. So part of what was going on, Yutas Kislev, was that they were challenging Chassidus in general. The Misnagdim had come and said, one of the things, we know about the idea that the Alter Rebbe was planning to overthrow the government, that charge, that accusation. But part of it was that the government regulated religion, and they were saying that Chassidism is not a legitimate form of Judaism, and so it would have to be banned. And ultimately, if the Alter Rebbe would have been found guilty, God forbid, that would have essentially put an end to Chassidus in Russia. So a lot of the questions that they asked him were deep philosophical questions, things that he wrote in Tanya that had been printed just 2 years before, and other questions about the Chassidic philosophy, Chassidic way of life. One of the sorry?
They had already studied what he had.
Absolutely, and the answers he had written. Anyway, one of the questions they had asked him was whether he was a student of a disciple of the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov is the founder of Chassidism. And the Alter Rebbe said yes. Now they knew that the Baal Shem Tov was the founder of the Chassidic movement. So the Alter Rebbe said he knew that if he would say no, that would have solved a lot of the problems. Because here they got the wrong guy. They thought they're getting a disciple of Baal Shem Tov, and say he's not the disciple of Baal Shem Tov. But the Alter Rebbe says, And the truth is, he wouldn't have been lying, because the Alter Rebbe wasn't the disciple of the Baal Shem Tov, he was the disciple of the Maggid of Mezrich. But the Alter Rebbe says he couldn't fathom being separated from the Baal Shem Tov for even one moment, even just lip service, even just saying it, and even if it wasn't a lie. But that was something he couldn't be separated from the Baal Shem Tov. So even though it was going to cause him a lot more trouble, and a lot more time in prison, and a lot more interrogation, all the different heartache that came with it, he says he wasn't able to disconnect himself. So it's interesting that the term he uses, he didn't say he decided he's going to. Doesn't say that. He says he was incapable of disconnecting himself from the Baal Shem Tov. He wouldn't have done anything wrong. It would have been true. It wouldn't have been, but he was incapable of disconnecting himself from the Baal Shem Tov at that moment. And the same idea is true. You can stop it. The same idea is